This is not a recruitment podcast. Welcome back to another episode of Powered by People. I am lucky enough to be joined by two amazing co-hosts today. We have Rex Brusling, who's going to be joining us from the Rec Hub itself, our sales director at the Rec Hub. And we have Jaime, who's joining us as part of the Love Honey group, but has also just recently joined them after leaving Auto One. So we're going to be talking a lot about a couple of different topics. We're going to be talking about how to make better decisions using data within the world of recruitment and people as a whole. We're going to be talking about some of Jaime's experiences managing a team who has been torn apart by war in the Ukraine. And we're also going to be exploring how your company's brand may also impact your strategic setup for recruitment, as it's not quite the same, Jaime, is it? Selling an e-commerce store that sells sex toys may be slightly different to a fintech like Auto One and the demand for that role.
Correct. This is very different. So when you are working in a company which is selling used cars online, and then you move to the sex toy industry, yeah, there's a massive difference. You can
not just because they're not second-hand.
No, definitely not. We are talking about the positions can be called the same, and it's a kind of same role, and we're looking for probably same people for the same positions, but there can be reluctances to join the company.
What are the sort of typical things that you hear from people about why they don't want to work there, or how do you get around it?
Well, honestly, you don't really get to speak with the ones that they don't really want to work there. Then they just don't ping you or contact you. But I believe that I've been there for 1 month yet, so I don't really know the stories, to be honest. But I can tell you that for my own experience or for the experience of my team, that there is a question that always come along that you know what we do, and if you work in talent acquisition enough, you know that every single recruiter in the business asks that question to the candidate, and not all of them know about it. But he's tricky.
Definitely.
I think you've got wear the elephant in the room pretty quickly in the process, haven't you? You don't want to be wasted. If that's something that's going to come up at some point, if you haven't researched the brand already,
definitely
you're going to realize at some point you're selling sex toys.
I think it's going to be easier in different teams as well. So, fortunately, you're in Berlin, which is a very progressive city anyway.
It is,
for sure. And I think that people understand a lot more now that these products are basically, they're not seedy. It's about wellness. It's about being sexually healthy. And if you look at, for example, teams in software engineering, data science, analytics, these tech teams, ultimately, by nature of being in tech, that's progressive in its nature. So they're always going to be attract more open-minded, forward-thinking individuals. I imagine it's more challenging in other departments.
Oh, definitely. I mean, there's a bit of everything. First and foremost,
Finance, I can imagine that's a tough one.
Yes, accountability. Yeah, definitely. There's people who takes it like, So we'll give you an example. So I used to do a lot of interviews 2018, 2019 when I was working more heavily on recruitment, and I always ask the candidates, like, what do you know? Do you know the company? And sometimes you get fed up with them, like, how do you do the research? How you don't know?
Yeah.
And I remember one who told me once, I don't care, I code.
Yeah.
He was like, you should, mate. And now I'm in this company which you should care, because you might have religious belief for whatever reason. So, and it might not be your piece of cake, your cup of tea. It might not be your cup of tea, and you have to choose if it's for you. At the beginning maybe you don't bother, and then I found people in the interviews telling me like, it's just another product. Good.
Yeah.
If it's just another product for you and then you can work with it, then it's absolutely fine. If it's not, then you have to consider what are you getting.
100%, because I can guarantee you, having done some research, that you can also buy sex toys off Amazon. But that you don't necessarily not go to Amazon because they're selling sex toys. It's an e-commerce platform that that you're creating, right? And it's about, from particularly from a development point of view, it's about creating the best possible e-commerce platform that you can.
We want to give the customers, we want the customers to understand their own sexuality. We want the customers to get to know themselves better, to achieve wellness, people who have never explored their sexuality and through toys, it's not only for one person individual, it's for couples as well, for every kind of individual. And we want to not only sell them the product, we want to be a brand for them that they can go and they can rely on our advice and they can rely on our products, and we can, coach them in some way what's better for them, and they can get to know better. It's not, for sure you can buy an Amazon, you can buy an eBay.
Yeah, anywhere actually.
But this is just a product. You buy the box, you buy the product, and you figure it out yourself.
100%.
There's kind of two things in that. So like, you buy a product because it tells a story. So you will basically buy sex toys, from Love Honey, not on Amazon, not because of the toy necessarily, just because it tells a story about you caring about sexual wellness and
or exploration.
What that means for your relationship. Otherwise, it's literally just a piece of plastic.
Yeah.
But the other thing you were saying about how, why would you want to be at a company? It doesn't have to be the fact that you're a product user. You can still be passionate because you think it's got fantastic business goals.
100%. We are the Powered by People podcast, and the majority of businesses that we work with, or the majority of candidates that we deal with, a lot of them aren't joining just for the business. They're joining for the people. You when you leave a business, you don't leave a business remembering the products that were sold or the service that you offered, but you remember the manager that you worked with, or the colleagues that helped you in a particular project, or it's usually the people that create that influence, I think. So moving through the agenda, I suppose, we obviously wanted to talk a lot about how we bring better decision-making processes within the people sphere using data. We, for one, at the Rec Hub, are not great at it, are we? So
Getting better.
Yeah, we're trying. Data-driven decisions are. We more of a. How does that feel? How does that gut? What's the gut saying on that? And you need to be building those systems and processes in place when things are going well, don't we? So that you're not on the back foot when they're not. But talk to us a little bit. Obviously, this is something you worked a lot on at Auto One. Talk to us a little bit some of the initiatives that you looked at when trying to create better data-driven decisions in Auto One.
Well, data acquisition, you can do lots of things with data. But the main thing that you have to do is to set up the fundamentals. Because to have good data and to rely on the data that you have to establish other people have to do the same thing. It has to be measurable.
Yeah, with that, you need to also therefore make sure you're looking at the right data that can translate among talent acquisition managers hiring with different departments, because if you've got people working in fulfillment centers and somebody else working on the data science team, their processes or the data for them, if you choose the wrong data, it won't be relevant.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. What's the process of figuring out what's the right data to look at?
It depends a lot on the sample that you have. And you look at the sample that you have, and then you start to understand how trends work. And then you see trends. And then you can gather the entire company recruitment funnel, and then you see a trend. And then you can see also how people are using properly that. And then you can see correlations between the stages.
Yeah.
You can grab fulfillment centers or refurbishment centers, and then you can see that they do, for example, a test or assessment center instead of doing a final interview with the hiring manager. Okay, you take that along the way. But then you see conversions between calls that the person in the team of talent acquisition does and what do they do in tech, for example. And then you can see correlation. You see a lot of correlations, a lot of percentages, how the conversion rates are happening. So funny things that happen, for example, in a team of talent acquisition managers, let's call it, or specialists or recruiters, is that there is people who calls a lot and there is people who calls nothing. So there's people who calls 100 people per month, and there's people who does 50 calls per month.
Yep.
And then you have to see what is the end of the line.
Yeah.
Because if you have one who calls 100 and hires 5, and then you have one who calls 50,
hires 5,
you need to understand what happens, right? And there is this common discussion between performance and results. What matters the most?
Yeah, we talk about this all the time. Input and output.
What benefit of a people analyst to work alongside you in any of the companies you work at? What's their approach? Because I think a lot of these data-driven decisions they come from recruiters who have never perhaps studied in a quantitative field or been an analyst. So how do you see their angle approach when you work with an analyst?
Well, they have an orientation. They can see figures. They can see data, and it's also a negotiation with them because in social science, data is not mathematics.
Yeah,
like engineering, you know.
Yeah.
So you have to understand that there's fluctuations. That there are things that they already set up perfectly. So it's a bit of a negotiation with them to understand what we want and what do we want and how do we read them, and then telling them what is acceptable or not. So you can also tell them little changes. So for example, they might tend to give you the average of something information, no? The average of calls, the average of offers per month. So I was like, and I might prefer the median because as you mentioned before, there are differences between recruitment processes. So it's not the same if you hire technology that if you have refurbishment centers. But if you take the median, you can have a good representation because you're not looking at the outliers of the sample. You take away these extremes of the sample, and then you can rely much more on the data. These things you can discuss them with your data analyst, and that's really helpful.
That's really interesting that you're telling them what you want to see necessarily, because I remember you said at the beginning of this conversation that you think that there's lots of data in recruitment. There is lots of data in recruitment, but I think it's harder to know in people sciences what the right data is to be collecting and looking at, because I've spoken to companies where it works the other way around. Actually, the analysts are telling the recruiters what data they should be looking at.
It can happen.
And unfortunately, I don't think that's the right way about it.
Yeah, I agree with Jaime. I think you need to, because ultimately an analyst is there to analyze information. Well, you've got a couple of different roles, I suppose. Making sure that the structures and processes are in place to collect and collate that data, and then to analyze that data.
Not analyze it and then tell what
exactly.
You may have people that want to collaborate with you. You may have people that, as member of the board, come and say, "Okay, how long is it going to take me to have all these people in place?" And they go in and give them a measure without asking you before.
Yeah,
and that can happen.
In fact, so like it could be the case that brand new initiative, this many people to hire, 6 months time, you're looking at the cost per hire, and an analyst comes back to you after a month, and that cost per hire looks super high. But you need to give me a wider time frame to measure that, and you will see that cost per hire getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller all the way to the end of the project. But it does take somebody with experience, wisdom,
I've seen,
which is not data led, but it's valuable.
I've seen that in my case. Again, I don't know, from my background, let's call it, I can give them some indication and it tends to work. But yeah, sometimes or they assume things that you were saying in terms of cost per hire, or even not considering variables like people leaving the team, or people leaving the recruitment team, or people leaving the company, and how long it takes you the replacement. They can consider also that when someone joins your team, it's a linear progression. So you have one hiring 5, and you get another one, you get 10. Not really.
I think you know, if you aren't living in a data-driven environment, you have to start with what you want. What do you want in terms of insights? You know, what do I want in terms of insights? And that could be, you know, if you're looking at recruitment, it could be cost per hire, it could be time to hire, it could be candidate experience, it could be any of those things. Then once you've got the insights, then or what insights you need, then you have to go down and start looking at, so what information is needed in order to generate those insights? So we need X, Y, and Z information. Okay, so how do we record that information? And then that's when the process systems tools come into place, whether it might be an NPS survey that I've worked at. Yeah, possibly. We was a Bitpanda, I think, on a project with Bitpanda, and after every if a candidate got to a final, whether they got the job or not, whether they accepted an offer or not, they was emailed with a sort of a candidate experience survey, and they collated all of that data, because they started with we want to understand. The insight was candidate experience. That's an insight that we want to understand. Okay, so what information do we need to collect? Well, we need to understand. We want to collect a rating from 0 to 10 from every candidate that goes all the way through the process. How do we collect that? Well, then let's use this tool, or that we can build the tool internally, or we can find a business or a platform that's going to enable us to do that. I think that's the process that a lot of people start with. We've got all of this data. What can we get from this data? And you can go that way around, but then you potentially are in a position where you're now just trying to find a use for the data that you've got, as opposed to identifying key metrics and insights that you actually want to look at.
To derive. Yeah, that's a good point. I think it's a non-negotiable of ATSs nowadays that they have to provide better measures from candidates. And like you could have, like you say, some probably some like expected dashboards that people want to see that are really easy to extract from an ATS, but being able to build your own is just really important.
Jaime, just so we can plug a couple of technology platforms and get more vision on the podcast. What's the best tools you've used over your time in people?
Coming on the part of gathering data, I believe that the ATS covers a part, but the best thing you can do is to get an ATS that can integrate it with Tableau or a Power BI tool or BA tool.
Which ones have you used?
Tableau for me.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Yeah. I believe you have that, you truly have everything, because most of the company can go into Tableau. You can have accounts for executives and so on. They can really, get access.
You can push pretty much any data into Tableau, can't you?
It has to have an integration.
Yeah.
The ATS already have it.
Yeah.
And so you just have to, speak with someone in data analytics or BI and and try to get.
What about in terms of ATSs? What's your best ATS or favorite ATS?
My favorite would be Smart Recruiter.
Oh, really? Interesting. I've not actually used that. I've been through quite a range, but not Smart Recruiters. I quite enjoyed Greenhouse. I think that was good. I think the automation setup was pretty good. We looked. I used Lever on a number of projects, and I like the nurturing features where you can build your candidate pools and then set sequences to nurture particular pools of candidates. That was quite a nice tool.
I thought that Lever was probably, for me, it was the best one around like individual candidate process, but then I loved the reporting aspect of Greenhouse probably more.
Yeah, absolutely. The data, the intelligence of Greenhouse was probably, even if it was just the visual elements, was better. I didn't find Greenhouse. I found Greenhouse quite funny when booking interviews. I think it was Lever had easy book links, and that just made it. That was actually quite a seamless. Like it was as seamless as Calendly. Whereas I find some of the other ATSs are a little bit more difficult.
It's called Easy Book.
Easy Book, yeah.
We do have Lever.
Oh, awesome. What was that process like with Smart Recruiters?
Well, the beautiful thing of Smart Recruiters, you can pretty much customize it all you want.
Yeah.
So you can customize the recruitment process. Super easy to gather data from it to that.
Oh, amazing.
Very good for candidate experience. Very good for of course, some glitches here and there.
There's no perfect solution.
There's never. I always hear people talking very good about Greenhouse. Yeah, chance. And I also hear people talking bad about pretty much everything.
Yeah. There's always something, like you say, it's certainly down to preference, isn't it? There's going to be things you like, you don't like, on all platforms. What about, I know candidate NPS is one of those that I really feel like a lot of companies could be doing more about. Have you ever worked with measuring a candidate NPS at all?
They really do that in Auto1, as far as I can see.
Yeah. I think it's something that a lot of companies missing, and I think it's such important data.
I don't think I've ever worked on a project where they've actually measured candidate NPS accurately.
Yeah, it's either at all or not. Because we used to with Pat Burke, didn't we? We used to sit down and he used to have, these are your candidate experience scores for each recruiter. So you'd be able to understand, from each recruiter, what their candidate process was like.
This is good in the sense of like, if you know that you're going to be registered a record of how your experience is, you're going to do better. Or is it that you're going to get penalized?
When do you ask?
I must admit, I love the accountability aspect.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking of is, from a candidate, when do you ask them to give a feedback score on their process? Because if you do it when they've been rejected,
True. Yeah, true.
If you do it when they're in process, if they've just been hired,
I don't mind if it's when they are rejected, but from my point of view as a manager of people working in talent acquisition, but if then you pass that to an executive or
I see it differently.
3 out of 5 for me maybe is amazing.
What are you doing wrong?
Yes.
Yeah, this is true actually. But that, I suppose that comes down to managing expectations, doesn't it? Because even if a candidate's rejected, having that data to actually understand how they feel about the candidate experience is going to be really important. Even if it's a 2 or a 3, we know that on average most candidates rejected are a 3, for example, and that's good for a candidate that's been rejected. Whereas candidate that's hired, 4, 5 is where we should be at. So then if a candidate rejected is a 1, we know that there's something wrong there, that there was something really wrong with the process.
and that's the interesting point. So you've said at that point, right, something's wrong. Now, it's then identifying what data should we be looking at, because it might not be that somebody's a horrible recruiter.
Yeah.
It could be that we have no data on capacity planning, and actually we're pushing recruiters to get through maybe 30 screens a week. Yeah. They've got 40 requirements, and unfortunately candidate experience is suffering as a result. And what we should really be looking at is how to perhaps measure and judge capacity planning.
I think that the insights, and this is really what insights are for, is a trigger for you to deep dive into different pieces of information and data, isn't it? So then once you understand that there's a problem there because of that, candidate experience piece of data, that your insight that you've got.
Yeah.
Now let's have a look into that to understand what the problem might be, and then come up with some resolution.
If it was for me, I would truly get every single piece of data that I can gather.
It's the new gold. Data's the new gold.
The thing is, like, many people get scared, and you're working with them and you tell them, I'm going to start measuring. You have to do this because I have to measure your performance. And they are, what do you do based on my performance?
Yeah.
And the same happens with the candidate experience and so on. So for me, we'll have everything, and then I will take decisions on the basis of what they have.
Are there any piece of data, because your role, Jaime, is bigger than recruitment. It's more of a overall people function. So obviously, Jaime, your role is slightly more broad, or broader than just recruitment, and you cover a number of people topics. Are there any other areas in which you find data being particularly relevant? What maybe we should start with, what other areas do you cover within the Love Honey Group?
We arranged to cover other areas of more generalistic work for the eastern part of Europe, for Poland and for Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
How many people did you have employed in Ukraine before the war?
Before the war, or I believe we managed the highest amount of people that the company had back then. It was 145, or no, 145, 150. Yeah.
Wow. What was that first week like?
It was horrible.
Yeah.
Managed disbelief.
Yes, I'm very united to the country for personal reasons as well. But yeah, it was tough. I remember we were having management meetings. I believe the war literally started on Wednesday. I have this setup. Probably it was Thursday. I don't remember specifically, but I remember, like, beginning of the week we started having these C-level conversations. So people who had employees there on the director level, CTO, senior vice presidents, and so on. We started having this conversation with the highest representative of the company in terms of human resources there, which was reporting to me, Hannah. And we started meeting there, like how are things? And they were telling us, nothing's going to happen. Yeah, we don't believe it's going to happen. We don't believe it's going to happen. And another day passed, things tend to intensify. We don't believe anything's happened. And then
the war kicks up.
Well, because I might be remembering incorrectly, but I swear the build-up of arms was at least a year. Was started at least a year prior.
I don't think there was ever. No, everyone always thought it was just
a show of strength,
a muscle-building competition.
Yeah, believe that they will remain the East. Yeah, it will not go in the country level. Let's say they will more the East apart, and then that the people. I mean, the company was hiring people around the country. So we have people remotely pretty much everywhere at some point. But the initial core was in Kiev. And most of the people was in Kiev. So there was not that belief that nothing's going to happen. So,
Sure.
time started to move, and they started to move close to Kiev at the point.
What were the first sort of reactions from you, your team, the business in those first few days?
I remember the day when I woke up that day, and I picked up the phone because it was sleeping. I don't have the phone sleeping nearby anymore, but they have it, and I opened Slack, and there was a message from the CTO like condolences and support to the people, and we won meeting after meeting. We gathered the people we were speaking that week, and we started thinking what to do for support.
Sure.
So there were calls with the people in Poland, people in Romania, because the company has dependencies there, and immediately after the border was closed for male above 18.
Yeah.
And so many men above 18 weren't allowed to cross the border. No, we're going to be needed for the draft.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Oh, that is that. I can't even imagine how scary that must have been, right? Yeah, we had no employees, and we didn't have any real interactions really with the war itself.
The only thing I would say is that at the time, I was very conscious of the fact that there were some really good talent acquisition managers who were probably thinking of getting out of Dodge.
Yeah,
needed something, and I did try to hire people, but the issue for me was at that time we don't have a Ukrainian entity.
No,
we didn't have a solution in place to hire people as an employee, and we also didn't really know what kind of support there was for us as an employer. As an employer of these people. And also they seem to be moving quite a lot, so it was quite difficult to pin people down for interviews and things like that.
Yeah,
it was complicated.
Did you manage to support any, actually, because I've spoken to a few companies who were able in the early days to support some people, coming over to Germany or to the UK?
Yes. We offer, the company offered back then a relocation package for people who wanted to move, and we did our best to support them with assistance. Whether it was on a different language or any sort of translation. So, for example, myself, I have this person in Poland, Mati, and he was picking up calls or helping people to get settled in Poland. For example, helping them with everything, legal documents, contracts, information about the payments, and even housing if it was needed to help them to contact landlords or other people who move to another countries. Many people move to Ukraine, to Spain, for example.
Yeah. How did they?
Yes. Many people moved to Spain for different reasons, or was there already, or whatever happened, and they contact us to help them to settle with the local entity contracts or things like that. Yeah, so we help them as much as we can on the change of contract, and also helping the economical support, and as much as we could. Yeah,
brilliant.
It was quite nice to see a massive call to arms from a industry perspective. I think there was a lot of collaboration happening. There was lots of spreadsheets flying around where everybody was doing what they could to kind of make sure that the right information was getting shared with people on the ground, so that they could find opportunities for themselves to get into a better position. What
would you say, Jaime, was your biggest challenge? I know Love Honey Group. You've only been there 1 month today, so congrats on your first 1 month. But whilst you was at Auto One, what would you say was one of your biggest challenges, other than the sort of managing the emotional turmoil and physical turmoil of a war? More like in the detail of people as a whole. What would you think some of the biggest challenges were for you?
I believe biggest challenges was the hyper growth in itself is a challenge. You have to hire tremendous amounts of people.
How many were you hiring? Or what was the target on like a monthly basis?
We managed to get somewhere like 45 a month.
Wow.
On the highest amount that we got, 30 or so.
Did you see a drop in quality in things like onboarding and things like that?
There were drops in things, but I believe that one of the nice things is I believe that the quality was kept.
Good.
It's interesting because what you often find is countries where they invest a lot in education, you end up with great universities offering brilliant STEM courses, and then the fear is the brain drain that goes after that. So you've got all these fantastic graduates who are like absolutely brilliant computer scientists. Obviously, Silicon Valley wants to snaffle them all up.
Yeah.
And how are you going to keep them for the prosperity of the country in the future? And these 6% tax rates are basically the mechanism to do that.
Yeah.
I don't think they're the only country that's had that issue. There's lots of them that try and sort of battle to keep the best minds in the country.
Yeah, they have countries that are more attractive in terms of economic power, and obviously that happens.
We used to get that when I used to live in Singapore, and again, they've got 2 of the top 10 universities for STEM courses out there are Nanyang and NUS, and basically they now have got a lot of things that they offer Singaporeans to stay there, because otherwise they'll do their sort of semester out in Stanford or whatever, and then actually they decide they want to stay in the valley.
Yeah. So, Jaime, we've got we've only just been started to film this podcast, so when I say we have a tradition, it's a fairly flimsy one at this stage, but and we definitely didn't copy it from the Diary of a CEO or Stephen Bartlett, but maybe we did. But we have a tradition on the Powered by People podcast where we ask every guest to write a question for the next guest. This question has been written by the wonderful Rose Hargreaves from Klarna in London. And she says, or she asks, what has been the hardest part of your job and how did you resolve this?
I believe that the hardest part was to manage several teams, many places, many countries, and make them performing and having very good results in this wave of hyper growth and massive hyper phase. 2021 and even the beginning of 2022. That was the most difficult part, like how to agree with yourself. Like if you have people in Berlin but there's part of the team which is somewhere else, you should not privilege the people that you have here.
It's really difficult. How did you put, what sort of initiatives or processes did you put in place to help overcome some of those challenges?
Forcing myself to be very digital. That regard, like I believe that I can do a one-on-one with someone face to face. It might be more effective, but if I have a person in the same level, so I'm talking like maybe I have two team leads. I had 2 team leads back then here, or 3 team leads here, and I have 1 in Spain. I cannot privilege them.
Yeah, it's very true.
Ones that are there, right?
We have exactly the same challenges in the Rec Hub because we're a remote first organisation. We have a couple of offices, but they are, if you would like to go into them, we don't force anyone to sort of go in. And actually ensuring we created something called the Vibe Team, which definitely wasn't stolen from Hopin. But we basically put them in charge. Is a collective or a committee, if you like, of people in the business who are responsible for ensuring that we have a positive remote working culture, because that was such a huge challenge. If you're in an office every day with somebody, to make sure that you're not giving them any favoritisms, if you like, unconsciously or subconsciously, unconsciously. That's a bit weird, isn't it? If you're giving them a favorite, if you're a creating favoritisms because of that you're with them more often than people that you aren't with. You also have to have quite strict policies and rules in place, because sometimes you want to make sure that the introverts are, because if you're an introvert and you work remotely, you're even less likely to be looked at for promotions and pay rises and recognition and reward, because you're not shouting as loud on Slack or whatever communication platforms you use. And whereas extroverts may be a little bit more able to do so, or may have more confidence to do so.
It can be, it can happen. But yeah, it's a matter of balancing.
Yeah, for sure. And that's us from the team here today. We have Jaime, Rex, and myself, Harry. Thanks for joining us. Hope you've enjoyed the episode. And come back next time.
To what we call it in delivery here, the ABCs. So the A's is basically our aspirations as an organization, and those doesn't change. Those are cutting across all the company. Then you have the big bets, which is basically what every function is doing in order to achieve those aspirations. And then you have big bets. So this is what I'm getting at. And then awesome. And then you go for like the commitments. So what are the commitments that we will do in order to achieve those big bets? And then you go into the aspirations. So